Okay, so there is no secret. There is no very sophisticated reason. It's very, very simple. It's a question of timing, and it has happened all over the world. If you get the epidemics very early, you can control it. If you get it a week after, it's even more. It makes a big difference. Okay, because you have a lot of asymptomatics. Okay, yeah. So it looks as though all the evidence points towards that we got it 1 or 2 weeks earlier than you guys did, and that makes all the difference. To give you some, if you see in that piece of news in La Razón, they worked out for China. If they had started 3 weeks earlier, they could have reduced the cases to 5%, 1 week earlier to 60-something%. It's all there. Yeah. I don't have the numbers here with me. So it does really make a difference. And you see that in the UK as well. They started a bit late, and New York as well, they started a bit late. Yesterday, a friend of mine in New York is running the program there for COVID. He sent me some retrospective study they did with the serology. They look into the blood bank of the hospital. The donors that had given us blood in January, early February, they already had antibodies against the virus. And the first case to be diagnosed and confirmed was in March the 1st in New York. That means that the virus in late January was already circulating in New York. And because the virus came from Europe, we know that because when we sequence the virus, the genetic content of the virus tells us that it came from Europe. It means that in Europe, in late January, there was a huge amount of infection already going on, which was the case in Spain, Italy, and France, not so much in Portugal. So it's all a question of timing. It's nothing to do with hospital or National Health Service quality or population being less healthy in Spain, or smoking habits or anything like that. All those things, they may have some or cultural habits. All those things may have a little impact, but it's not this huge impact. Okay. Okay. So that is the reason behind it. There's it's very simple to explain to people why. Okay. So the chance of your second question is. There are 2 questions: chance and danger. What are the odds of big events being run this year? Look, it all depends now. Let me explain something to you. The virus now is spread all over the world. The pandemic potential now is far greater than it was 8 weeks ago because the virus is everywhere. Yeah. Okay. And why is it greater now? Not only because the virus is everywhere, but because the percentage of the population in the world and in Spain and in Portugal that is susceptible to the virus, it's still very large. In Spain, there are more people that are resistant to the virus because you had a bigger infection, which is good news in a way. Okay, so you may have, I don't know, 5% of the population immune, or 10% at the most, but still, you might have 90% or 80% of the population which is susceptible still. So in Portugal is even worse because there is a price to pay for us to control our epidemic so early, and the price is that we don't have much herd immunity, population immunity, and pandemics, they happen because there is a large population which is susceptible. Once that population diminishes, the virus will reach an equilibrium, then the pandemic stops. Okay? Okay. So the chance of organizing events, it really depends on the nature and the size of the second wave. Okay? Now we have a first wave of infections. Okay? And then what the countries did all over the world was to do lockdown. And that is very efficient because the virus transmits, is a respiratory virus. It transmits in small droplets of saliva, okay, and or secretions, which means that you need some kind of proximity and coughing and touching in order for you to inhale the virus and get infected. So if you stop that, you stop very effectively transmission. You can never stop transmission totally. It will always get a background of transmission. And you could stay for like this for 2 or 3 years if we stay, even if we stay inside our houses, which is not possible. Okay, so we need either to have a vaccine or we need to protect the high-risk group, which are the elderly people, and get on with our business of our lives and spreading the virus amongst us, because the virus will spread and will get people immunized, okay? And without major fatalities, because most of us deal well with the infection. It's just a normal infection, okay? So
let me just, because you know about what you're talking and I do not, that second wave, or that in the people that's now immune because they have suffered the virus, are you considering now as virologists that it's not going to mutate like the influenza virus, that each year you have to get a different vaccine? So once you are immune, you're immune forever, or is it going to be like the influenza, that every year it will be a new one?
It's totally different. It's like comparing cycling with rowing.
Okay.
Okay, they are completely different viruses. Okay, or outdoor cycling with indoor cycling, if you want something more a bit more subtle. It's totally different. The influenza virus is one of a few, if not the only virus, that its strategy is to change antigenically so it can survive in a population by drift. It's called immunological drift. Okay, it's antigenic drift. So that's how it does it. It's like outdoor cycling. Indoor cycling, like this coronavirus, it doesn't change like that at all. It's very stable, and the virus in Spain or Italy or the United States or China is essentially the same, with small little differences, and those little differences do not translate into higher mortality or higher ability to spread. It doesn't translate into biological gaining. Okay, so the virus, if you manage to find a vaccine, the vaccine should be effective. It's not going to happen like in influenza. Influenza, it's one example. It's an exception. Okay. Okay. So you cannot compare them. The second wave, it will come, but its intensity, its size, it will depend what countries do. Okay. Now, it's not a problem to have a second wave amongst the non-high-risk people. That is not a problem. The problem is that if that wave is too big in society, it's very difficult to protect the high-risk people, because there is a lot of virus around, and it's the probability of people contacting the high-risk people, it's very high. So you have to do that in phases. And you have to use the tools that are available to us. Okay, so there are three ways of controlling this. One is social distancing, the second is testing, and the third would be with the vaccine. The vaccine is not here, so forget about it. Okay, so you need to devise intelligent strategies to have social distancing and use the testing, okay, the serology and the diagnostic testing of the virus to protect the high-risk people, to protect the retirement homes, to protect the hospitals with old people, okay? And the way you do that, it will determine the size of your wave. So in a way, you want to restrict the movement of people because you want to protect the high risk, but in another way, you want to encourage natural infection to build up immunity, okay? That's the only way of stopping it. So there is a conflict of interests here, like it's like in a scale. So you need to be very intelligent in the way you do this. So now, translating this into big events, okay? Now, look, if a second wave comes and if things get out of control, it will precisely come June, July, or August. And if it's even worse than that. It works like this. Imagine that you release the society now. It takes about 8 weeks or 6 weeks to see the real impact. Okay? So imagine that now it's the end of, imagine it's the beginning of May. You release everybody in Spain. Okay? You get May, June, mid-June. In mid-June, you say, wow, this is out of control. And then you put, again, restrictions. In mid-June, that will go until July or something like that. And then you're not going to have a big event in August because they've learned the lesson. Or imagine that it's okay, but then it gets to July or August, you see a start of cases, they will stop immediately, you see? So I think, I can understand why the Tour of France is saying end of August, that the Strada Bianca is saying the beginning of August, and you guys are trying to do things in October. But in generally speaking, I think those dates are going to be more critical.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. Now, yeah. The other thing is that I'm not saying that it's not possible to hold events. For example, golf. It's very easy to hold golf events at closed doors. Now, with the Tour of France and with the La Vuelta and Giro, it depends how you do it. Your problem is that even if you do it without people, okay, without spectators, you have the problem of the peloton. The peloton is quite large, and all the people associated with the peloton. I'm not sure if your health authorities will allow you to do it or will demand that you guys have been all tested serologically, and only the people that are seropositive will be able to participate in your technical teams, the media, and all that. So I see it it's a pity because I like cycling, and for all the fans, it's very bad. But I see as a virologist that the chances are very low. In terms of danger, I don't see it as a big danger. Okay. Mm-hmm. In terms of public health, I don't see, if it is in closed doors, controlled, and that it doesn't attract millions of people like in the Tour de France, I don't see it as a big danger. But it would have to be very well controlled. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have answered your questions.
Yes. I also wanted to ask you, because when we speak about top sporters, we always speak about organisms that are on the edge of a good health when they are in the peak of the Tour de France or Giro d'Italia, Vuelta España, whatever. Would cyclists be in such a higher risk than the rest of the population? Should they be infected during those competitions?
That is a very important question, a very pertinent question. And my answer is a general answer that if cyclists, especially in long events, they are at the edge of their immune capabilities. So everything has been fine-tuned towards a cycling performance. And you know as well as I do that sometimes they even have more infectious mononucleosis because certain viruses get reactivated because they are at the edge, and their immune system it's affected by the levels of intense exercise. Okay, so in that sense, it's not only for this virus, for any virus, for any infectious diseases, the athletes are at a higher risk. Okay, and because this virus is very attenuated, but it's telling us that in people that are sick or without immune function or good immune function, they get pneumonia. And so it is very possible and likely that certain athletes that are on the edge of their health will get the infection badly. But if they were just normal and rested, they wouldn't get it as badly. That's a very general assumption, and that it's we can make that assumption. It's very logical.
Dr. Simas, we have seen some European countries banning sports events. I mean, not sport events, but their citizens to do sports outdoors just because of the confinement. And others, like Belgium or Denmark, are encouraging their citizens to do some kind of sport for 1 hour, 1 hour and a half a day. From a strictly virological point of view, which of those options are better for the public in general? No, I'm not talking about professional sporters now. I'm speaking about citizens.
The second option, to promote sports, and promote sports especially outdoors. The likelihood, even in the peloton, of the virus spreading from one athlete to the other in open air, it's not that great unless, well, let me rephrase that. We cyclists in a peloton, we have very often, and actually very, very often, we have to sneeze, okay? And that creates an aerosol, and that is a danger in a peloton. So I will rephrase what I said. But if you're running alone, or if you're running in a sparse peloton, and if you take some care, it's very difficult to inhale in open air, to inhale the virus from another person. So I would encourage a lot, like we do it in Portugal, that cyclists, they take to the road on small groups of 2, and they keep some distance, and people go running and people go walking. It's very important that people keep exercising. It's important for their health. It's important for their immune system. Mm-hmm. So I'm all in favor of doing some sports, and I'm all in favor for the athletes, the professional athletes, to train alone or in very small groups, taking some care. Now, in the situation of the peloton, which has got 100 or over 100 people, and everybody is sneezing, and everybody is going 180 or 190 beats per minute in terms of cardiac beats per minute, it's difficult, right? Because as you know, when we do this and we blow our nose, we create a spray, and the guy behind will get it. Okay, so it's very important that you do your sports, but you know that the virus is transmitted by spraying, and so you keep your distance.
Mm-hmm. You have compared before cycling and golf as 2 different kind of sports and 2 different situations regarding the chance of having major events or not. Focusing on cycling, I think let's just compare it with football. Football, you have your domestic league, like in Spain, in Portugal. Spanish and Portuguese teams can play in their own country without coming in contact, if not necessary, with other countries. But the Vuelta a España this year is going to visit, if everything goes as planned, the Netherlands, Spain and Portugal, with a peloton joined by, 100 different nationalities. From once again, from a virologist point of view, is that even, would it be even foolish to think about doing those kind of major events?
I don't see the viruses. They don't distinguish between borders or countries or people. I don't see that as you bringing different countries or doing it in your country is the same. The problem is a global problem, okay? The problem is when you bring together a lot of people and you maybe, if some of them are infected, you don't know that they are infected, you may be spreading the virus. But it depends in what stage of the epidemic, of the pandemic you are. As I said, you may be in somewhere down the line. You may be in a position where we want to encourage some kind of infection because we have now the high risk groups protected, okay? And organizing these kind of events won't be a problem. We're not there yet. We are a bit far from that. So what people are proposing now is that in those sports where you can do them without spectators on closed doors, where the athletes can be screened with diagnostic testing and serology, you may be able actually to run them, okay? So imagine this situation. Imagine that all the athletes in the Tour of France had already been tested and they were all immune, seropositive, okay? I would see no reason to do it. Or imagine that you could do it without, even if there was infection there, but that runs into the problem of being more dangerous for these athletes. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I answered your question actually.
Yeah, and it brings me to another question. I don't know if you have read like 1 month ago, maybe a little bit less, that Dr. Marco, one of the Formula One Red Bull team owners or whatever he is, had thought about taking their drivers to a corona camp just to get infected and then being immune. Just to be clear about that, how a good idea is that if it crosses the mind of any sport manager, owner of a cycling team, taking all their cyclists, taking them to a corona camp, getting them infected in order to get them immune?
Okay, well, look, this is what we used to do in the old times when our mothers would take us to a friend of ours at their home because they had varicella, for example, okay? And that is called community infection and vaccination. And one of the things I think we have to do is the virus is the problem, but also the virus is the solution, as you were saying. And because this virus is very attenuated, we can use it as a natural vaccine to vaccinate people. The question is an ethical question. That's the issue. It's an ethical issue. As a virologist, from the point of view of the biology of the virus, it makes sense. However, we know that in nature, accidents always happen. And it may be that one of your athletes will require intensive care. Okay? And in that case, it will go to intensive care and his chances of recovering are really, really, really high. Okay? But there are always the exception to the rule. And one of these athletes may die. Okay? And that would be very complicated in terms of the decision, in terms of liabilities. So in a way, I say, yes, it makes sense, but then it goes over my competence as a virologist because I'm not an ethicist, I'm not a legal expert, I'm any of those things. So yes, I mean, myself personally, I'm not confirmed as being infected, but I've quarantined myself 2 months ago because I had all the signs of infection, and it went through me. And I was with my sons and with my wife. I kissed my wife the same. She got some signs of infection. She now recovered, and our children never got anything, and they were infected. So it all makes sense. And if I do the test now, I'm not in a rush to do it because, I mean, there is no point of doing it. It all makes sense. You see, that rationale is a good rationale. That's what I advocate, is that once we protect the high risk group and we have our national health service controlled, we can then let the virus do its work in the rest of the population. But we have to be careful because even amongst the healthy population, non-high risk, some people will require intensive care units. Okay, there are people with 20 years of age, with 30 years of age that have a worse infection and need to go to the hospital. And then they go to the hospital and they don't die, but they need to go to the hospital, otherwise they may die. So you have to be very careful here.
Okay, I only have two more questions, Dr. Simas. The first of all, rephrasing one of your answers before, is about that second wave coming sometime this summer. Given the, if I didn't understand it bad, given the numbers of Spain is going to be, let's say, more prepared because of that immune group, because of the ciphers now than, let's say, Portugal or any other country that with less infected now?
You are right in the way you are thinking, absolutely right. But because we are at the very beginning, the numbers are very low. If Portugal is 2% and you guys are 10%, the difference, because it's at the very beginning, is not that great. But theoretically, we are more at danger than you are. But you know what is an exponential curve?
Yeah.
Okay, so you are at the beginning of the exponential curve, right? When you start, yeah? And so you're not even at the inflection point, yeah? Never mind. So if you pass the inflection point, like, if you're telling me that if you have 30% or 40% of people that had contacted the virus and now are seropositive, I would say, yeah, I think it's much, the danger of the wave is much lower, because it's very simple, because every 3 people in your country, if you do 30%, it's already immune in 10 people. So you have 7 susceptible and 3 resistant. And so you see, it's not like 1 or half a person. So I don't think at this stage for the second wave, countries are more or less all the same.
Okay. And my last question, and I know that you scientifics don't like to predict in the future, but I would really like to ask you, how optimistic can we be on finding a treatment and or a vaccine, because I know that those two things are very different things, during, I don't know, the next 12 months, something like that?
Okay. Let me go first to the treatment. Drugs and medicines, they only work at the hospital level. Treatments will be very good to deal with people in critical condition. Will never solve the pandemic. Okay, so medicines are good for hospitals and clinics to save people, and they are very important. Never in the history of humankind we had a drug to prevent an infection at the global level. It doesn't work like that. Vaccines, yes. If we have a vaccine, you can produce the vaccine, providing you can produce the vaccine for everybody, then you can create immunity very fast. And then you completely stop. We have many examples of that, with poliovirus, with measles virus, with all those viruses. And now hepatitis B virus, all these. Now, what is the probability of having a vaccine in 12 months? There is a chance. Some people say that might be even a chance of having it earlier. But one thing is to have a vaccine. The other thing is to have a vaccine that works. So my experience tells me that it's very difficult to have vaccines that work. And for example, I'm not going to give you examples because the viruses are very different. Like you were pointing out before, you were comparing influenza and flu with this coronavirus. But let me tell you something. We have several coronaviruses that infect domestic animals, pigs, cats, dogs. And in the veterinary medicine world, we have tried a great deal to develop effective vaccines against these they are either enteric or respiratory viruses. And it's very difficult because these viruses, they cause mild infections, and they cause infections in the upper respiratory tract. They are superficial infections. And it's very difficult to have vaccines that are very effective against that. They may be effective against a lung infection, but not against okay? And so I think it might be a challenge to have a vaccine working in 12 months' time. However, I'm a scientist, and I know that science can produce really unexpected things, especially when everybody in the world wants to have a vaccine, and it's lots of there are more than 70 now projects on vaccines around the world. And so let's hope for the vaccine, but let's not sit down and wait for the vaccine. That would be a huge mistake, because it's impossible to wait 6 months or to wait 10 months or even to wait 4 months with our economy stopped in a lockdown. So let's keep people working on the vaccine, but let's not bet on the vaccine as a way of resolving our problem, solving our problem now at this stage.
Okay, Dr. Simas, thank you very much for those answers. And I think we now have a more clear picture on what's going on in the world.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure for me.